Hello, everybody. Welcome to Shop Talk, hosted by the Triangle Area SQL Server Users Group. Tonight, you can see it's a short cast in terms of people. Mala is working a bit on a book. Mike is on secret assignment. Tracy is also on secret assignment. I have no such secret assignments. I am just a guy standing in front of a green screen. So that left me holding the bag, so to speak. But that bag involves talking to chat, so I will hold that bag for at least another 50-some minutes. So Shop Talk, quick idea of the show. What we do is a little bit of, it's Monday afternoon, work is hopefully over for you, or will soon be over, and let's kick back, talk a little bit about some topics of mild interest. If you have questions, I may or may not have answers. So drop those comments, questions in chat, and let's get started. The first thing I wanted to talk about last week was Dev Intersection. And this is the second in-person Dev Intersection that I've been able to attend. The first one was in December. This one, much later, in April. And kind of got an idea of the differences between December events and current events, where, for example, I think attendance was probably pretty similar. I could see that some people are ready for in-person meetings, and some of the rules and restrictions around in-person meetings have been relaxed a bit. Hopefully we see more of that going forward. And overall, I think the conference was pretty solid. There were a lot of interesting sessions. It's a nice combination of talks along a series of different tracks, from web development, application development, talking databases, artificial intelligence, machine learning operations in the data world. I mentioned databases, but a lot of this is warehousing, database development. So some good talks there, good talks for DBAs, getting into some of what's new in SQL Server 2022, some of the deeper dives into the data world. And I think it was a worthwhile experience. I'm also seeing that we are seeing a bit more in terms of in-person conferences. Last show, we talked about SQL Bits. Today, I'm talking a little Dev Intersection. In a few weeks, we'll have SQL Saturday Jacksonville, which will be the second SQL Saturday in person since 2020, since March of 2020. So we had Baton Rouge in the beginning of March, and then a good year and a half between then and SQL Saturday Orlando. And now we've got Jacksonville, New Jersey just announced. So that, I believe, I think that's the first SQL Saturday in Newark that I've seen. I don't think there's been one there before. I could be wrong, though. Definitely the first one that I will have submitted to. Are we going to bring back SQL Saturdays to Raleigh? That is a good question. Actually, something that I do want to discuss with chat. So you get the position of being able to influence one member of the board. The rest of the board has gone on secret assignments. But we're looking at the possibilities. I say we're looking at the possibilities. I haven't really talked too much about it. We looked last year at, could we have in-person events again? And the short version was that a couple of the venues, the places that we had talked to for user group meetings, there was one that was receptive, but it didn't quite work out with timing wise. I think that they'll be receptive again if I do reach out. I think what'll happen is that we'll have in-person user group meetings this year, and maybe we'll look at a SQL Saturday for next year. Putting on a SQL Saturday is a good 4-month commitment in terms of level of effort. Now, when we were putting on one every year, we had a lot of the institutional memory, so that actually one of our latest SQL Saturdays, I think it was the 2019 edition, we essentially had 3 months to put it together, and we were able to put a lot in place in a couple of weeks and make it still work out as a really good conference. So, considering that most of the people involved are still in the area, still with the user group, I think there's a possibility, but I wouldn't bet on anything until next year. One of the biggest considerations that I haven't even looked into yet is going to be around whether or not we could get a venue. So historically, we have hosted our event at colleges because that's a place where you can get a lot of different appropriately sized classrooms, where there are projectors, where there's enough area for people to move around and get to different places. We have enough tracks, we can host everybody. Colleges right now are really not hosting events, at least not in the Triangle area. That may change between now and next year. I wouldn't expect it to change this year. So that's why I'm saying don't get your hopes up for a SQL Saturday in Raleigh this year. If we do it, my guess is it'd be around this time next year. I do like putting it on in mid-April when it's nice and spring-like. Hopefully the pollen season is over and we don't have to compete with college football, which we don't have to compete with college football. We don't have to compete with college basketball. So we don't have to compete with college sports of any major concern, because here's where I poke fun at North Carolina college baseball teams, even though they're actually generally pretty good. But don't worry, nobody goes to see their games. I was waiting for somebody in chat to be like, I go to see all of the UNC games. I'm sure there are people who will do that. So that was just me poking a little Friday, Saturday, Sunday fun at somebody. All in good nature, I hope. Anyhow, for in-person user group meetings, I think we're going to have something. The .NET user group is starting. They actually have their first Let's Get Back Together, It's Been Too Long meeting that is scheduled for this Wednesday. So silence says it all. That could be. Their first in-person user group meeting is Wednesday, and they're hoping to get back up into a cadence. They've got one host who's able to support them, so they may do 1 or 2 meetings a month at that place, and then trying to get other venues that previously hosted the .NET user group, like the local Microsoft office and other companies, to see if they're willing to open up the doors again. So it's good to see them picking that up. I wish I could attend this one on Wednesday. Unfortunately, I will not be able to. I'll be presenting right around the same time. So hopefully everything goes well in that get back together meeting, and that I'll be able to make some of those in person again. I think that aspect of community is something big that user groups provide, and the aspect of community works so much better when you're in person. Now, that said, when we do go back to having in-person meetings for the for Triangle Area SQL Server Users Group, we're going to do hybrid meetings. I had all the equipment from back in 2019. You can actually check the TriPass archives, and on the YouTube channel, you'll see meetings going back to something like June of 2019 when I bought all the equipment and I had no idea what I was doing. Now, we're a couple of years later, and I still have no idea what I was doing, but at least I know how to get that equipment to work most of the time. So we've got that in place. When we do go back to in-person, we will definitely broadcast as many of these meetings as we can. Also, when Tracy and Mala set up the schedule for this year, we went from the assumption that, well, pretty much everybody's going to be virtual, which means our in-person meetings depending on who the speaker is, if they're in the area, if they want to do in person, we might have a few actual speaker in-person meetings, but it may be until next year that we really get a solid block of people actually expecting to be in person for the user group as far as speakers go. All of this is open. Like I said, I haven't even talked about it with the board yet, which means that you have the meandering opinions of one guy who got drew the long straw and was the winner here on Shop Talk Island. But we'll see. We'll see what we can do. We'll definitely be working with companies to try to find good meeting space. We may be capped on the number of attendees we're able to bring in. We might have some issues where, okay, we can do one a month, but we can't do all three a month. Timing may come into play as well. Turns out that that not having to drive half an hour to a venue is pretty solid. So Wake Tech is a possible SQL Saturday venue. Yeah, historically, I've enjoyed Wake Tech. I liked the North Campus. I actually really liked the Morrisville campus when we were able to put it up in 2019. 2020, we had the Morrisville campus scheduled. Everything was in place, and then due to COVID, we had to cancel everything. Since then, I don't know that they're accepting third-party types of events yet. Something I'll look into, if they are accepting them by the time we're ready for a SQL Saturday, then yeah, I'd love to have it in that Morrisville campus, because that's a brand new set of buildings, very centrally located. It's right in the middle of the triangle and very close to the airport. Nice for speakers flying in. It's a decent drive for everybody. So I think that's probably one of the best locations that we could host it, but that's all going to depend on whether or not they're actually willing to host. And that's something that I haven't done enough research on, so I can't tell you for sure either way. However, based on what I had seen, they weren't really doing hosting at this time. So we still have 12 months. We probably realistically have about 6 months to see what things look like, and assuming that nothing radical changes between here and say October or so, when we would provisionally start planning, then we would start reaching out to facilities, see if we could host an event. We may be capped on number of people. We may be capped on number of rooms. My guess is that they will, some of the rooms that used to hold 30 people now hold 15 to 20, and therefore we might be hard capped on the number of attendees that we're allowed to have at the event. We may also have some difficulty getting people in. When Orlando had their in-person event, it was very small cap. It was not capped. It was just a very small attendance. They had maybe a sixth or so of the normal number of attendees. Granted, that was late 2021, and I'm sure things will have changed between then and April of 2023. But it is one of the factors that we're keeping in mind. And yes, so the .NET user group has 25 attendees. They do have a wait list. So for the venue, the place where they're going to be at, that place normally, by normally I mean 2019 era, would easily have held 40 people, but they're going to spread people out a little more and say, okay, 25 is okay, but if we go above that number, not going to be so great. I am also looking forward to hearing how it goes. What I'm also working with them on is the possibility of them doing some hybrid meetings. So using my hardware, my equipment, and for events where I'm able to be there, be able to simulcast some .NET user group meetings as well. We did once or twice. I remember I did a presentation for them and simulcasted it here on the TriPass channel, and we may do a few more. That gonna talk to them, gonna negotiate. Gotta meet my fees. No, but seriously, just figuring out if the plan works out, if the timing works out, if I'm available, and if we can work everything out, then it'd be great to try to simulcast some .NET user group meetings as well. What is up with the 2019 CU delay? So CU 15. That's a good question whose answer I think is going to be that they're really busy working on SQL Server 2022. So the latest CU, actually I want to double check this because I think you're right. I think 15 is the latest one. Yeah, so if I drop this link here to SQL Server updates, the latest CU was the end of January, which means we've had about 2 months, a little bit over 2 months, 2.5 months between the last CU and now. But we also had about 2 months between CU 14 and CU 15. For the first 12 CUs, they pledged to do one a month. And you can see that they really did have roughly one per month. There was a gap from CU 4 to CU 5. But their pledge was essentially have a cumulative update each month. One of them went horribly haywire. And there was that COVID gap where it's like, sorry, we're trying to figure out how to work remotely for an entire organization, so we were going to be delayed. But since then, we've seen every couple of months we're getting a new release. So CU 9 to CU 10, that was roughly 2 months. 10 to 11, 2 months. 11 to 12, 2 months. So right now, it's been a little bit more than 2 months. It's been 2.5. They may stretch that out a little further. Of course, as I say this, most likely CU 16 will drop tomorrow because I'm saying it may take a little while, but we'll see. And they'll continue developing some more CUs, but the product teams are really hard at work on SQL Server 2022, which may have affected their cadence for other cumulative updates. So that's my 2 cents on it. Basically, yeah, they're a little bit late, not as late as it would first feel because it's their cadence has dropped to once every couple of months, and there have been stretches where they've had 2.5, 3 months between CUs. Also, I wouldn't mind that cadence slowing down if it means that we have fewer problems introduced in cumulative updates. This is one man's opinion. There have been a lot of errors, there have a lot of bugs that have been introduced in cumulative updates. I mentioned CU7 was just completely pulled because of a horrible error. That was an issue around availability group. No, it wasn't availability groups. Snapshots in CheckDB. That's right. Yeah, so there was an issue where you could corrupt a database. If you had CU7 and you did, I forget exactly what the setup was to cause this issue, but it was not exactly the type of thing that would never happen. So they yanked that CU, introduced CU8 a month later, and I think it's indicative of a lot of the release process where things feel like they're not going out as well tested as they should be. I've seen a lot of bugs, regressions that have been reintroduced. Polybase was broken. For all I know, it's still broken, where you can't use Windows authentication for accessing resources. You have to use SQL authentication to work with external tables and the like. From CU2 to CU5, it would be a hard error, like an error severity 22, 21, 22, somewhere around there. It couldn't be 22. Actually, it was I think it was somewhere between 18 and 21, because it would kill your connection, and it would not kill the server, but it would kill your connection, prevent you had to like basically close Management Studio and reopen it, because you couldn't even reopen the connection on that tab. So either close and reopen Management Studio or open a new tab to connect to the server. It was just bad. Like this is just doing something in Polybase using Windows authentication. It's a pretty straightforward use case. But it was completely broken for a couple of months. Then it was no longer completely broken. It just didn't work. And the difference there is it would fail, but the error would not kill your session. It would not completely terminate anything that you have going on and make you a pariah to your server. It would just fail. So, yeah, I would not mind slower cumulative updates if it meant that they were better tested and that they introduced fewer bugs in release. We'll see. So that was a little discussion. In-person conferences, we're seeing them, a couple of SQL Saturdays here. We're seeing some events in Europe. I've seen events in Denmark, the Netherlands, Belgium, data mines, Norway. So we are definitely seeing more in terms of in-person events in Europe, but I think that they'll come back in the US as well. Developer conferences have been a little quicker to coming back. I think it's because there are on net more developer conferences than data platform conferences. We have a huge number of SQL Saturdays. Outside of SQL Saturdays, there are a few conferences that are database heavy or database friendly, but not as many as there are development conferences. And with SQL Saturdays, that pace it's going to take, I think, a couple of years if we ever ramp back up to the pre-2020 SQL Saturday pace. I don't think we're going to have 2 or 3 events per week across the US anytime soon. We may have 2 events a month for the next year, and that might be it. So that's, however, total speculation. It's speculation just based on, a lot of people who volunteered their time, did a lot to make these SQL Saturdays possible. They've just had 2 years off and realized, hey, there's a lot less stress if you don't have to run a big conference. And it is true. There's a lot of stress in running a conference, especially if you're either doing it by yourself, you're a fairly small SQL Saturday and you're handling all of the work yourself, or if you're a really big SQL Saturday and now you have to organize for 800 people. Think of Atlanta or Silicon Valley, where you'll have, or Orlando, 600 to 800 people. So there's a limited number of spaces that will accept you. You have to plan out all of these different things, food for 800 people. You have to worry about registration, about session selection, and all of those mechanics. And having a couple years where you don't have to do it, start thinking, why would I do this again? What kind of crazy masochist would do this? And the answer is, this kind of crazy masochist, but not this year. So we're looking at next year for SQL Saturday Raleigh, maybe. Again, the board may have my head for saying that out loud, especially because we've had no planning on it. It's something I would like to do if we can. So Mala could not make it tonight, like I mentioned, but she did have a link that was kind of interesting, and it was an article, IT Pro Today, talking about what makes data science teams thrive. I'm not sure I fully agree with the gist of the article, but let me give you the laydown. So one thing I do completely agree with is at the beginning of the article, they mention you have to have data before you bring in data scientists. A thing that I see fairly commonly in the industry is, let's hire a data scientist. You bring in the data scientist. Data scientist asks, where's the data? Oh, well, we've got data everywhere. And okay, how about this? We don't have that. Well, how about this? Well, we delete that data every night. How about this? Sure, we'll get that data to you. It'll take 12 weeks, but we'll put it on next quarter's plans. So your data scientist, who is probably one of the higher paid people in the department, twiddles her thumbs for a few months, says, I can't do anything here, and goes on to the next job where they experience the same problems. I think companies are realizing, have spent the last few years realizing, that you have to have data engineering processes in place before you really bring in the data science teams. I believe that 2016, 2017, you had a lot of companies try to put the cart before the horse, and they wasted a fair amount of money on people who couldn't do their jobs because they didn't have access to relevant information. Since then, we've seen a lot of talk about data engineering practices. We've seen a lot of talk about how do we get data into a data lake? How do we get clean data? How do we get data that somebody can analyze? So it sounds like they need a data scientist early on in order to make sure that useful data is captured, right? That's where things get kind of interesting. You could make that argument. I think more likely you need good data engineers first. So the data scientist is potentially that person who can act as almost like a data architect in this regard. I just did, yeah. So if your data scientist is the person who's acting as sort of architect of what data do we need, then yes, sure. Data engineers can be just not just as good. Data engineers can be very good data architects. They can be very good at trying to understand what is the nature of the problem, and then how do we get the data that we could potentially solve the problem. They may or may not be able to create the models that will solve the problem. They may not be great at efficiently resolving issues in that regard, but the data scientist doesn't necessarily come in with the capacity to generate data requirements ex nihilo. I think that this is something where any sort of data requirements, really you can do all of that without a data scientist if you have the right business people sitting down with the right data people and asking and answering the important questions around what is the problem that you're trying to solve? What is the goal here? We want to understand when people are clicking on links for our products, why are they clicking on this link instead of the other one? Or we want to understand what makes a person choose to watch this video versus that video. And even if the data engineer can't figure out the problem themselves, they can at least get a handle on what is the data that is going to be necessary and generate a first approach answer. Then, your very expensive data scientists can come in and help finish the problem. So think of it in terms of a dynamic game where you have new sets of requirements that come in periodically. Before you have that first real need for a data scientist, there's got to be enough data in place. There's got to be enough structure in place that the data scientist can get to work. It doesn't mean everything needs to be perfect. It doesn't mean that if the data scientist can't come in with a fully formed data lake that is perfectly laid out for everything they're ever going to need, that their time is useless or it's wasted. But there's that extreme, and the other extreme, which is I'm waiting 6 weeks for a laptop, or I'm waiting 6 weeks for access to a database because I'm not allowed to query the production database because I may knock it over. So I'm waiting months for a data extract just to find out that this isn't the right data. The latter is by far the more common scenario. And, it's where before that data scientist comes in and even has a strong notion of what kind of data could make a model better, just having something in place is really useful. So how do we capture data without knocking over production? How do we get information to specialists who need that? Data lakes aren't just for data science. They're also for business analysts. They're for any sort of data spelunking. They're for long-term data processing, for historical data storage. All of these different scenarios we can hit at without necessarily incorporating a data scientist. And granted, a data scientist can do good work without all of those systems in place if you have enough capability to get them relevant data. They may come in and need more data or different data or data stored at a different granularity. There may be slowdowns in that regard, but they don't necessarily need to be there to start this process. I think you want to have a process somewhat in place, but be flexible enough that when a data scientist does come in and you're paying that person a pretty penny, that they're going to at least have a starting point that is reasonable, instead of needing to wait weeks or months to get the beginnings of data. So that's something that I have seen pretty frequently in the industry, where they hire a group of people, but then those people aren't able to deliver anything because they don't have the groundwork done to enable data scientists. And so either the data scientists twiddle their thumbs, or they effectively become very expensive data engineers. Another thing that I do like from this article is understanding that any sort of data science project is probabilistic. And the article mentions this in two avenues, both of which I do agree with. The first one is forecasts are probabilities. We believe that, with some probability, event X will happen. Well, that means with 1 minus X probability, event X will not happen. Or 1 minus K probability, event X will not happen. This is important to keep in mind, that even when we forecast a number, our revenue prediction is $26 million this quarter. Well, realistically, it's 21 million plus or minus 6 million. And there's a probability, we're expecting this to be about 90 to 95% likely. So there's about a 90 to 95% chance that we're going to be between 21 and $27 million this quarter. And our estimated, our big estimate is about 26. You keep throwing out those chances, the likelies, the possibilities. And the thing is, for a lot of people on the other side, they don't hear that. They hear, 26 million. And then if it's really 22 million, or if it's 31 million, they'll say, well, this was way off. Yeah, it was off because, people aren't clairvoyant. There is no perfect prediction. People are not predisposed behavioral elements, meat widgets designed to do a thing with exact precision and in a predetermined manner, nor are we capable of seeing the future. And that's something that is important when working in a predictive analytics team. I'm probably coming off as an apologist for it, so be it. But this is all probabilistic. Any prediction is probabilistic. It depends on the assumptions that were made. It depends on the modeling techniques that were made. And every assumption, every modeling technique, those things add uncertainty. The real world is uncertain. Major events happen that can have a significant impact. And yeah, I don't think I have to give any examples of major events happening that have significant impact. I think you could probably fill in some of those gaps yourselves, that end up making things wrong. Sounds like the SNL skit with the Dan Aykroyd telesequel. I do not remember that. I'll have to check that out afterwards. But maybe the Johnny Carson show and his forecasting and predictions. Now, the other thing, every experiment, even failed experiments, are productive. Failure is a reasonable outcome for a predictive project. And failure happens for a couple of reasons. Number one is we did not have the correct data. We did not have the correct assumptions. We do not have the capacity. The uncertainty level is too high for us to make a reasonable prediction. So we failed because we didn't have the right kind of data. The good news is, if you know that you failed because you don't have that data, you can at least tell a psychic, okay, you can at least open up the possibility of getting additional data later. So we don't know about this prediction because, well, it turns out that the company deletes all of the data more than 20 days ago. And so we have no history of how things have worked. If that happens, at least you can understand that and say, okay, well, this experiment failed, but if we start collecting data longer term, over 3 or 4 years, now we have reasonable predictions. Maybe. Now we maybe have reasonable predictions. I mean, that is another assumption that's in place. There's a higher probability that this will be true, assuming that past behavior has any likelihood of affecting or of determining future behavior. It could be that your time span is too short or too long. So a classic example, stock market predictions. We are generally really good at predicting the stock market over a 5-year period, over a 7-year period, a 1-year period. We are really bad at predicting the stock market over a 5-day period, a 5-minute period. If somebody's able to predict it over a 5-minute period, then they tend to make a pretty good amount of money. But this is where you get to stocks being a random walk, where the prices move with a heavily randomized component that overwhelms trend in the short run. But then in the medium run, in the long run, trend overwhelms that randomized component because, well, random means it is expected to have the error term is expected to have some variance and a mean of roughly 0. And so you have that error term that's floating around, and it adds out eventually. So if you have enough data points, you're able to make pretty decent predictions. And you can, at that point, at that level, you can tie share prices with news and with fundamentals. So as you get information about a stock, you will see over time that the share price generally reflects the fundamentals of that stock. There are exceptions. those exceptions can last a little while. But in general, you'll see this effect. Now, the share price changes within the course of 5 minutes. That's not fundamentals driven generally. Generally, there's just too much random walk involved, which is why a model that tries to predict what the prices are going to look like 5 minutes from now, either you are extremely good at this or you're probably going to lose money. Even if you are extremely good at this, you may still lose money. So it may be a factor of, you're looking at the wrong time span, and understanding that failure, we may be able to expand the time span or contract it. If something follows almost an opposite pattern where we can make short-term predictions, but the longer-term predictions are very hard to make. So I can tell you with fairly high certainty that something will move up in the next 5 minutes, but I can't tell you where it'll be a year from now. In that case, that kind of a prediction, we can say, okay, well, we need to make those models much shorter term and see if they make sense. A third area where things can fail is we have the right time frame and the right data, but we can't get to the desired level of accuracy. However we define accuracy, whether the technical definition of accuracy or, as I'm using it here, a more general term of quality of the model from the perspective of the business users. So we may be able to predict fairly well that you're going to sell this many pairs of shoes. And we might have it within, plus or minus 15%, 20%. But if you need it to be plus or minus 3%, and we're that far off, this model isn't going to work for you. So this is still productive because it gives us an idea of, given our skill sets, knowledge levels, data, and time frame, here's where we're at. Can we do better? That's something that we'll have to work out. What would help make us better? That is a condition that we would have to work at. Are we at the practical limits? Is this a reasonable expectation? And it could be that the business side is coming in with an unreasonable expectation, and that failure can potentially help them understand, we've got this level, especially if there are examples in the industry where the best that the industry is doing is 74%. You're asking for 99%. It's just not going to happen. Not with the skills that we have today, not with the algorithms we have today, not with the data that we have today. And in that case, that failure is still informative. If you have a person on the business side who is fairly reasonable, who can learn from that, they can see, well, okay, we've got a couple options. We can adjust expectations. We can scrap the project, come back to it later. We can scrap the project, never come back to it. And depending on what the current team expectations look like and what the level of importance of the project is, that may help determine what ends up happening. Because they could end up saying, okay, 99% fine, that was unrealistic. I picked that number out of a hat. It sounded really good. And if I do the cost-benefit analysis, if I understand what a 74% accurate model gives me, I can either decide this is a net benefit to the company and we'll just go with it, understanding that 1 out of 4 predictions will be failures, or we could say, no, we don't want to stake our reputation if we're wrong 1 out of 4 times. Depending on how wrong you are, depending on how unreasonable it is, it may make a big difference. And of course, your industry, what it is that you're predicting, and what the consequences are of a wrong prediction matter a lot. If it is, for example, trying to predict likely customers who are more likely to buy a device, then being off 25% of the time they may still be okay with it if you hit on 3 out of 4 likely customers and you miss the 4th likely customer. There may be other ways that they can, or there are other ways that they can try to find that 4th person, but this is a way of potentially lessening the burden of sales. If you're doing self-driving cars and 1 out of 4 turns the car misses, probably not going to be a very useful mechanism. So that's not gonna fly. Well, the car might, but you don't typically want cars to fly. The last comment on here is something I disagree with. And the comment is that data science is not software engineering. I disagree with this. So I'm gonna read this out and then talk about why I disagree. Quote, although software engineering and data science are often conflated, they only share a few similarities: coding, creating pipelines, getting data from one place to another. However, the similarities end here. Where other disciplines often have a finite ending to a project, data scientists devise a model and continually retrain it so that it remains relevant based on new data coming in, unquote. I think that's completely wrong. I can't say I've never worked on a software engineering project that had a finite end. I have worked on them. They're rare. More often, we build something, we maintain it. We have to manage this thing for years, for decades. The software engineering process is not build, dump, move on, or build, dump, delete. It is build, maintain, complain about the people who built this before, maintain, wish you could rebuild it, maintain, rebuild it, find out that it's actually worse than what it was before, maintain. Most companies are working on software solutions that are decades old. Unless you're working at a startup, you probably have some mainline software that was built 10, 20, 30, 50, 60 years ago. And the bigger the company gets, the more likely you're going to be working on stuff that was originally concocted in the 70s, rebuilt, remastered, refactored, maintained, migrated, and managed for a good 50 plus years. And I completely agree with you, Solomon. That author has not done software development. Yeah, I don't know who the author is on this, but I agree. Also, data science is software development. Like, yeah, there are similarities. Writing code, creating pipelines, getting data from one place to another. That's not where the similarities end. One of the biggest topics in the data science world over the past couple of years is ML ops, machine learning operations, which is CI/CD. How do I retrain this model automatically? How do I deploy things automatically? How do I manage assets? The CI/CD problems of ML ops are an extension of what we've seen in DevOps, where the way I like to explain it is, with DevOps, our main problem was I have code and some artifacts. I need to get this code out into different environments in an automated fashion as inexpensively as possible, as consistently as possible. Data ops kind of builds on that, where it says we have code, we also have data, and trying to understand, because data is different from code, it has different requirements, it has different capability for maintenance, it has different maintenance requirements. We're going to have to build additional aspects to be able to manage that data. So, for example, how do I change a table that has years worth of data without losing all of the data on there? This is the type of problem that we end up with in data ops. In ML ops, you still have that DevOps problem of I have code. You have that data ops problem of I have data. You also have I have models. Models are things that have their own lifespan. We want to retrain them. We want to compare models. We have multiple models that we may be actively competing against each other, and we're trying to figure out which of those multiple models should we put out into production now. We want to track the efficacy of those models. We want to see if releasing this new model actually has a positive effect over time, or are we chasing the noise where I've released a new model because, oh, it's more accurate. And then I release a new model because it's more accurate, and release a new model because it's more accurate, and a new one and a new one. And it turns out that we're just basically going in a big circle, that we're just releasing new models because this data set has slightly different noisy data, and we latched on with this. Well, now this new data set has different noisy data, and we latch on here. And we're never really getting better. We're just chasing that noise. That's the type of problem that we're trying to solve with MLOps, but fundamentally, it's still dealing with that continuous integration. It's still dealing with continuous deployment. The things that we're deploying, the necessity that we have for making proper decisions, yeah, it's different. I think it's more complicated. There are more aspects to think about than deploying my web application, making sure my web application is fully tested, fully functional. But at the end of the day, guess what? That's still a major commonality. We're still obviously writing code, deploying code, managing code, the data pipelines, yes. Getting data from one place to another, yes. Managing that data, creating ways of updating the data, creating ways of working with the data, visualizing the data, understanding the results, processing the results. All of these are software engineering problems. What language you're choosing, that this is in Python or in Julia or in R or F# versus writing something in React on Node versus writing something in Java on Android. These are still software engineering problems. The languages may change, the specificities of the problem may change, but yeah, it's still the same thing. So that was that article Mala mentioned. Like I said, I agree with a lot of the early stuff. That last one, that was a real kick in the teeth. But otherwise, I think it was pretty well done. It was an interesting survey. So that looks like just about all I've got. Anders asked me a question offline, and that was a person who is getting into the data science world. And let me pull up that question just to make sure I get it right. So a friend of mine is thinking about going into a data science certificate program, needing it to research for an unrelated PhD. Has to pick a language between R, Python, or some more generic language, and asked for suggestions. So, I think anybody who's spent enough time talking to me realizes pretty fast that I am a major fan of functional programming languages. And of the two, R is definitely the more functional programming language. It is 90% of a functional programming language. Python is not. Sometimes it pretends to be. Often it does not even pretend to be. It is definitely built as a combination of scripting language and object-oriented language. So there are aspects of functional programming in Python, like lambdas, but the way they do lambdas is a little weird in Python. Nonetheless, it saddens me to say that I would choose Python as that language. Saddens me because I love R as a language. I think R is a fantastic language for statistics. It is a great example of a domain-specific language, and that domain is statistics or data analysis. So if you're in a data science program and you do focus on R, I think you can do very well. there are some really good data science programs that do focus on the R programming language. If you use SAS, I think you could do very well. There's a lot less today in terms of, say, universities using SAS. You don't tend to see that very often because SAS tends to be a very expensive piece of software. So historically, universities focused on R or S and got away with the open source and free alternatives. The industry has coalesced around Python as the dominant language for any sort of implementation. If you are a big fan of R and you really do want to stick with R, I think you can do that certainly in the academic world. You can do that in the industry. It is more difficult, but there are certain libraries like Reticulate that will allow you to execute Python code within the context of R. There are libraries that allow you to execute R code within the context of Python. There is this notion of cross-compatibility, and I think on net it's a good thing. R is still a better language for quite a bit in the data science world when it comes to more specific more specific algorithms or statistical techniques that you may not find in some of the libraries like PyOD or scikit-learn. You'll find a lot in there, but there are some algorithms that were written in R. You have some statistical tests that were written in R, and you don't really have a Python version of it. You could write your own, but there's no easy built-in library for it. Visualization, I think, is still significantly better in R than in Python. I love what Bokeh has been doing. I think that that has cut the gap a lot when it comes to professional-looking visuals. Matplotlib and Seaborn are adequate visuals. I would put them as like the built-in R plot versus ggplot, where with ggplot you can create a really professional-looking visual. It's not straight out of Adobe Illustrator, but considering that it's programmatically generated, it looks very nice. Plotly will work with both, and Plotly also does a good job of making things look very pretty. So, yeah, if it came down to it, my recommendation would be Python. But then I would introduce them to the world of F# and say, let me tell you about this programming language. I don't know that they would actually learn F#, but I got to try. Can't blame a man for trying. That's my philosophy. Speaking of philosophies, we are very rapidly reaching the top of the hour. So I want to say thank you, everybody in chat. Appreciate you coming around for tonight's rant hour with me. And hopefully in a couple of weeks, we're going to get Mala, we're going to get Mike back. Might even get Tracy back. We'll find out. That is something for the future. So come check us out in a couple of weeks. Remember that tomorrow we do have the data science user group meeting, and I'm going to pull that up right now. The link is meetup.com/trypass. And tomorrow we have building CLI tools with PowerShell. So this is our own Mark Wilkinson from the area, from the company I work at. Mark is the author of SQL Top, which is a really cool library. So you'll definitely want to check this out. It is a PowerShell library that is, if you're familiar with Top in Linux, it's pretty much that for SQL Server. So come on by, check that out tomorrow, 6 p.m. Eastern Time. Link is in chat here, meetup.com/trypass. And next Tuesday, we have Edwin, who is going to talk, Edwin Sarmiento, who's going to talk to us about burnout and eliminating burnout, hopefully. And then we'll have Shop Talk in a couple of weeks, and Jean-Joseph will talk about SQL for data scientists. So we've got several great presentations lined up for you for the month of April, and we're looking forward to seeing you. And until we meet again, everybody, take care.